This is Mike Wallace. You are about to see two people begin an unusual search for a new house.
This is our home on Intervale Road in Teaneck, New Jersey. We bought it in 1959. It's a nice enough house, 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, with a small yard in the back. Some time ago, we decided we wanted a larger house, a nicer house, one with more conveniences and a bigger yard. We knew it would be more difficult for us to find the house we wanted than for most Americans. But we had the money, and we were determined to try.
His name is Corbett Rochelle. Since last July, he and his wife Sally have visited many real estate offices like this one. To learn what happened, CBS Reports went along, our camera and sound equipment unobserved in a small truck parked nearby. We had no interest in the identity of the people the Rochelles visited. We simply wanted to follow their search for a home. That search was photographed and recorded as it happened, week by week, month by month. Only the Rochelles and the people who later helped them in their search knew that their movements were being followed. If some of the sound is not of first quality, it is because it was obtained under difficult conditions. One real estate agent telephoned the owner of a house on the market.
Listen, I have a party that came in the office. He's a colored man, and he came in and he's interested in a home. Would you permit us to show the house?
CBS Reports, Segregation Northern Style, is brought to you by the new Polaroid Color Pack camera for color pictures in 60 seconds. CBS Reports, Segregation Northern Style. Here now is CBS News correspondent Mike Wallace.
This is the story of one family's search for a new home. It begins where they live now, in this quiet suburban neighborhood of Teaneck, New Jersey. For the past 5 years, Corbett and Sally Rochelle and their 11-year-old daughter Alicia have lived in this neighborhood. Last July, they put their house up for sale and started looking for a larger house, a house that might sell for about $30,000. Corbett Rochelle explained why.
Well, I think basically our reason for wanting to move into a better home is the same reason that anyone would want to move into a better home, and that is that we can afford a better place and we want a little more usable space than this house affords.
The Rochelle search began in the usual way with the local newspaper. Sometimes they made appointments to see houses. Sometimes they drove through neighborhoods first just to get a feeling of what they were like. And of course they visited real estate agents in a large number of communities. All of the agents were polite, none were rude. Corbett Rochelle tells of one visit to an agent.
I went out alone one weekend because Sally my wife was at home showing our house. I went to one broker, and after I assured him that I could take care of the financial obligations, he said, you're the first Negro that has ever come in here looking for a house. And before I would be able to take you over, I would have to call them and let them know that you are colored and ask them if they mind showing to a Negro.
But I would like to take a look at something, if you have something that I could look at.
I want to do right by you, and do right by myself, and do right by the people whom I'm working for, and do right by the law, so to speak. It's a situation that I'm not going to cure for you. I guess overnight, case of education, and we are a little bit in the middle.
I was out trying to, get something lined up that I could see today because I have more free time today.
If you have no objection to call you and tell you what I have, go over it with you.
And the whole thing wound up by him telling me that as soon as he got something suitable, that he would call me. But I haven't heard from him.
At one house we went to, the husband and wife were in the hallway. It was a split. You could see up the first few steps. And they seemed a little surprised that we were a Negro family, and they had this little argument as to who would answer to the door.
How you doing?
Hello.
We're the Rochelle's.
Would you like to look around by yourself?
Well, I would prefer if you went with us to save stumbling around. This is how many rooms?
10.
10?
Yes.
Gee, come on. And you're asking how much?
28.
28?
I called her back because I didn't remember how many full baths she had, as this is an important thing with us. So I asked her how many baths she had, and she said, oh, we've got 3 deposits.
The next weekend, I went back to the house because I was a little surprised that you would have so many deposits on one house. And I found the owner clipping his hedge, and I started talking to him about the house, and he informed me then that he had 6 deposits on the house. And he also told me that this was not a GI mortgage. Of course, I understood what he meant when he said that he didn't have a GI mortgage. In New Jersey, it's a law that if you don't have a GI or FHA mortgage, that you can select as to whom you want to sell your house to. However, if you do have the FHA or GI mortgage, then you have to sell it to any buyer who is eligible to buy.
By any standard other than race, the Rochelle's are eligible to buy the house they are seeking. Like many families in the growing Negro middle class, their income is higher, their education better, and they can afford better food, clothing, housing, and medical care than the vast majority of Negroes in the United States. Corbett Rochelle, after years of working for somebody else, is now in business for himself. The business? High-fashion wigs. Taking orders from private customers in their homes, he and his salesman have the wigs custom-made, and they deliver the finished product to the customer. With his business flourishing, Corbett Rochelle has an excellent income, but convincing a real estate agent of that was not always easy. The conversation you're about to hear was recorded from across the street. The flashes on the screen are cars passing the real estate office.
You can buy FHA, but you have to have a very good income in order to be able to carry 2 mortgages.
Ooh, I don't want to carry 2 mortgages.
No, but right now you are. You got that one down there. You haven't sold it yet.
Yeah, well, I'm planning to sell it soon.
Yeah, but the
I
best
expect it
time
to be
to go
sold.
out is when you sell it. As soon as you get a deposit. See, actually, you're jumping a little too quick. Because even if you see a house you like now,
Well, they're not going to sell that fast. I figured if there's no point in me waiting.
The price is right. It'll
Yeah,
sell.
there's no point in me waiting. Well, the price is right on my house. This is the reason why I'm expecting to sell it soon.
That's why it'll go.
Yeah.
But the minute you get a deposit, that's the time to shoot out.
Yeah, but sometimes this is a little late in the game. You like to have something definite in mind. Because going out cold, looking for a house when you are possibly on the verge of having to move out of yours is what I consider a little late.
The conversation went on. Eventually, Corbett Rochelle convinced the agent that he could, if necessary, carry 2 mortgages at the same time. He asked to see a 4-bedroom house.
But we don't have 4 bedrooms.
Not one. Here's a picture of something here. This wouldn't have 4 bedrooms? This right here.
These are all 3 bedrooms. That would have. Is that 4 bedrooms? That's 4 bedrooms.
Yeah, I'd like to look at it.
I'll check on this to see if it's still available.
And several days passed. I thought I'd given him enough time, and I eventually had to call him. And then he told me that the house had been taken off the market. The man did not want to sell his house any longer. And, of course, that was the end of that. There seems to be a tendency with a lot of the brokers that we've talked to run down the property or run down the neighborhood or the town.
We have some property down on the east side here. We're building on it, but the lot alone cost $17,000. And the thing is,
That's not even realistic, is it?
it's not even realistic. That is for sure. Now, maybe in some other town.
One of the first rules of salesmanship is to try to build up the product that you're going to sell to the prospect.
The prices today, where they're ending, I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
We've been here 28 years.
I thought the taxes in Fairlawn were supposed to be reasonable.
They're not reasonable anywhere.
You don't run a house down or a neighborhood or anything else down that you're trying to get a person to spend their money for. And this is very contrary to what anybody would do who is really trying to make a sale.
What do you have in the Milford anyway, or Bergenfield? We don't go in there too much. I can't see those towns. They have absolutely nothing to offer.
My reactions when a real estate broker starts to run down a town by saying that the prices are too high is that I don't know whether he's saying it because it is actually true or whether he is saying it because he wants to discourage me because I am a Negro.
According to Webster's dictionary, a ghetto is that quarter of a city in which members of a minority group live because of social, legal, or economic pressure. Attractive as it is, this neighborhood, where the Rochelles have lived for the past 5 years, answers that description. Over the past 10 years, its composition has changed from all white to nearly all Negro. Whites no longer move in. Negroes, as the Rochelle story indicates, find it difficult to move out. The Rochelles told us why they were seeking a new home outside this neighborhood.
I think any place where you find Negroes grouped together because they have been forced to live or gerrymandered into living in a ghetto, if we may call it that, is not a good mixture. Let's say that this particular man is very close to having a PhD. Next door, there's a lady who does housework. Across the street is a man who has a law degree. Next door to him, there may be a man who is a gardener. When you get this kind of mixture in a neighborhood, certainly there is not much compatibility except for the fact that they live side by side.
When we first moved here, there were more children, for one thing. There are less children in the neighborhood, more adults, more automobiles. And when we moved here, there were about, about 5 or 6 Negro families in this particular block.
White people have moved out for varying reasons, of which most of the time they never give. They seem to feel that Negroes moving into an area has a tendency to depress property values. Why, I don't know, because the properties now, and I'm speaking primarily the ones surrounding us, including this one, look better than they did before the Negroes moved in.
The Rochelle search for a house went on. Newspapers were carefully scanned for promising leads, and looking at the ads, there seemed no end of houses for sale. Calls were made for appointments to see homes or to talk with brokers or to find out why brokers who had promised to call them hadn't. And weekend after weekend, both Saturday and Sunday, one or both of the Rochelles would go out to follow up the ads, to look at a house, to see a broker. Our camera went along recording the events without disclosing the identities of the people they visited. They broadened the area of their search to include Dumont, New Milford, River Edge, Oradell, Teaneck, Bergenfield, Westwood, Paramus, East Patterson, Fairlawn, Glenrock. Again and again, real estate agents had nothing to show them.
What do you have that you can show me today?
Nothing in this price range. Nothing at all.
Another agent in another town.
I'd be taking your time out of fooling Mr. Rachel. I told I am. I usually look for inexpensive stuff.
You do?
I will make an appointment to try and get you something to 2832. In other words, I sold all kinds, but at the moment I only have a couple of inexpensive ones.
A third agent in still another town.
About 28 to 32.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
See, right now, I can't think of it right now, but suppose I take your name.
All right.
And as soon as I get one, I'll give you a call. That'd be all right, would it?
A fourth agent in a fourth town.
I have nothing in the 4-bedroom right now.
July ended and August began, and still they had seen nothing that really approached the house they were looking for. They did see some houses. They even met a few owners who seemed willing to sell to them. But always these were houses that were too small, had too few bedrooms, had no basement. The big problem was getting to see houses at all. A majority of the real estate agents claimed to have nothing in their category. A few agents did show them a house or two. Almost always these were houses that did not meet the Rochelle's needs of size, of price, or location. One had a basement full of water.
I've wondered often as I've gone from one real estate agency to the other if people realize the many embarrassing situations and questions that you have to go through as a Negro, sometimes even humiliating, in order to even get to see a house. You realize and you're made to understand that you're being treated as someone special, someone who is really not wanted, mainly because you are a Negro and for no other reason. One particular agent that I went through the usual routine of asking me the questions about, how much money you make and so forth. And after we got through all of this, he mentioned a house that I was very much interested in. And I asked him if we could see it.
Well, I have to call him and tell him that, that you are colored.
Why?
Because some of them don't, they feel that unless the home is actually built FHA or GI, because of the new law, they don't have to take themselves anybody.
Why don't we talk to him? How do we look at it?
Let me call him up. Hello, Mrs. This is listen, I have a party that came in the office. He's a colored man, and he came in and he's interested in a home. Would you permit us to show the house? What is your occupation?
I'm a salesman.
He's a salesman. And your husband isn't home now. When will he be back? Around 3. Oh. Yeah. Well, that's up to you. See, that's the thing. It's your prerogative. It isn't up for me to say yes or no, you see. Because by law, I have to abide by the new law, you see. Right. Well, supposing I tell them then you'll reserve decision until your husband comes home. All right. Okay, thank you. She can't say because her husband isn't home. It's all up to him,
She has no objection, but he may have some.
He might have.
Corbett Rochelle never did see that house. When the husband came home, his decision was to rent rather than sell it. But the conversation in the real estate office continued.
Do you think we'll ever reach the state where race is not a barrier in America?
In time.
In race relations?
I think in time. Let me ask you a question. Why would you want to move into a predominantly white section?
I live in an integrated world. When my daughter goes to school, she doesn't go to school with colored kids, she goes to school with kids.
That's right.
Some are nice and some are not.
How do you believe in intermarriage?
I believe in intermarriage. If you feel like having a Japanese wife, I think that's your prerogative.
Not all white families resist selling their homes to Negroes, and some would genuinely welcome Negroes to their neighborhoods. In a few communities, whites who feel this way have banded together to form fair housing groups to promote the cause of housing integration. Spurred perhaps by the Civil Rights Revolution, these groups have increased in number from fewer than 20 in 1959 to more than 500 today. Late in August, after weeks of futile house hunting, Sally Rochelle turned for help to such a group, the Bergen County Fair Housing Council. She told Housing Opportunities Chairman, Mrs. Harry Strickholm, about their search so far.
We went to a lot of brokers, which I sort of kept a record of because it was so many. We covered 24 agencies, and out of the 24, 16 agents did not show us anything. We saw a total of 13 different houses that were shown to us by 8 brokers in 11 towns. And out of, well, the 13 different houses that we saw, we only saw 2 that we liked the houses, but either there was something wrong with the neighborhood or something.
That's pretty sad. I think that in your price range that you would expect to have seen probably at least 2 or 3 houses with every agent if they were really cooperating and really trying to show you something. How would you feel if the Fair Housing Council were to send in a white tester to a real estate agent that you had been refused by? And if the white tester is shown several houses, then perhaps you and I could go back together, and if he again says that he simply has absolutely nothing, perhaps we could confront him with this list and see what he would do.
Over the next few weeks, this plan was carried out. A Fair Housing Council member, Mrs. Harry Potter, drove from her home in Tenafly, New Jersey, to a real estate agency that had shown the Rochelles nothing. She asked to see houses in the same size and price category that the Rochelles had asked to see.
I wondered whether, if you had a selection of houses, if we could go through and pick out 1 or 2 that seemed the most promising.
Well, let's take a ride. I'll take you over to one we have in the development and show you that. Right. And then if you want me to ride by a couple of them.
Kay Potter was shown 2 houses and offered a chance to see more. With this information, Corbett Rochelle went back, this time with Gene Strickholm. Again, he was told they had nothing in his category. After threatening to file a complaint with New Jersey's Division on Civil Rights, Corbett Rochelle was offered a chance to look at a house in a town he was not interested in. He declined the offer. At a public meeting of the Fair Housing Council of Dumont and Bergenfield, a second of these tests was described in detail. Gene Strickholm chaired the meeting.
Now, over the course of the summer since we last met, there have been 6 families that we have worked with. We're fortunate tonight in having one of the families here with us tonight. Mr. Rochelle, would you tell us about your experience with a real estate agent and what luck you had with him?
Well, we went to several brokers, but one particular broker that I'd like to tell you about, I went alone. My wife was at home showing our house to some prospective buyers at the time. And after we went through all the usual procedure, he made me know in no uncertain terms that he couldn't show me a house unless he called the person and informed them that a Negro was going to come and see a house. And I asked him why, and he told me that, well, first of all, no broker is showing Negroes homes in this area. They have maybe a few homes picked out that they're sure that you wouldn't want, and they may take you to those, but nobody is showing homes on an open basis, and I don't want to be the first one. He promised to call me, and of course, I never heard from him.
So at this point, I asked Mrs. Phyllis Dumont of the Fair Lawn Fair Housing Committee, and also a member of the Bergen County Fair Housing Committee, if she would visit this real estate agent and try to establish to some extent what homes he might have available.
Well, my experiences were quite different, as you might well imagine, than with that of the Rochelles, and I had to identify with them. So I found out as much as I could about what their requirements were. Well, that afternoon I went, and no sooner had I gotten inside the office and sat down, he took out several cards and had already set up 5 or 6 appointments for us to go and look at houses. So we proceeded to look, and we did this for about 2 hours. We rode around and we saw 4 houses very thoroughly. When we got back to the office, he proceeded to verbally again described the houses while he wrote all the details down. And this is what I walked out of the real estate agent's office with, a list of the 4 homes with extensive details on them.
After this test, and that's what it was, a test, Mr. Rochelle and I went back to this real estate agent, and maybe we can tell together what happened there, because I sort of remember what I said, and I'm sure you remember what you said, and maybe we can both remember what he said. We went back, and he was very cordial and very friendly.
Mrs. Strickholm, this is Mr. I came to see what you had for me. I hadn't heard from you, and I thought I'd stop in.
Give us the ratio.
Rochelle, that's right.
I believe he started off by saying that he had been thinking and worrying and puzzling over what he should do from a moral point of view, and to do the right thing for the community and to do the right thing for the sellers who he was representing, and that he was trying to come to some sort of realization as to what was right to do. And do you remember what he said next?
He said it was an established fact that when Negroes moved into a community, the property values automatically went down, and it wasn't so much a matter of white people not liking colored people or anything like that, but it was just a matter that if a Negro moves into a neighborhood and any other prospective white buyer happens to come into that neighborhood and finds that there is a Negro within rifle shot or hollering distance, they just wouldn't even consider the house.
The people, not me, the people, not that they have anything against you folks, but they do not care to sell to colored because of not wanting their neighbors to sell to colored, because if they wanted to sell, they know the house would deteriorate. That's the one prime thing today.
He was convinced that this was true because he'd heard it, and I don't remember the rest of that part of it.
What he said was that the problem of housing did not lie with the broker. It's a problem of the seller. If you want to put pressure on somebody, he said, you should go to the seller and make them show you the house.
A person that has his house for sale and he has the government financing, there's any number of them, go to him, make him the guinea pig. Bring it up to a few of these people. Help us out. We have nothing against. We want to make money. We want to make money. If we have very few prospects today, it's a little tough. And boy, we would love to have some colored prospects, huh? It would be very nice for us. We're going to get clobbered at the other end, and clobbered and clobbered.
The man looked like he was going into a heart attack there for a minute, and he told me that, he says, listen, I have children. I want to be around when they're growing up, and for a second there, I really almost felt sorry for him.
And I went into, I think I read him the rules of the Real Estate Commission, and we talked about the law. And I think we just said, well, are you going to show the Rochelle some homes? And it was sort of like a transformation. The sweat left the brow, the complexion improved.
He completely changed.
He just looked, well, it's over. And he went over and he pulled out his files, and he laid out all the cards in front of you and just asked you to look at anything you wanted to.
That's right. And, of course, he showed us at that point with no reservations. He came right out and showed us the homes. He showed us 4 houses, and one of them particularly I was interested in. And I did call him back several days later and ask him if I could go and look at one of the houses with my wife, and he called to make an appointment for me. But in calling the lady, he referred to me as the Negro who was there the other day. And she said, no, I'm very busy. Then he asked her if maybe he could make an appointment for later. And she said no in no uncertain terms and just slammed the phone down in his ear.
Among the audience at this same fair housing meeting was William E. Jackson, field representative of New Jersey's Division on Civil Rights. Later, in his office in Newark, we asked him what he had done about the Rochelles.
Well, specifically, we followed the procedure which we normally follow in any prospective complaint. We have no way of knowing, to our own knowledge, whether or not a particular piece of property is covered by law. In the instant case which you are speaking of involving the Rochelles, we did make a double check because we have the right under the law to make a full investigation, to look at pertinent records and so forth. A check was made with the proper agencies, and we learned that the house was not so covered. Therefore, it is outside of the jurisdiction as our law presently stands.
With no help for the Rochelles to be found in New Jersey's laws against discrimination, Jean Strickholm went directly to the owner of the house involved. She was told that they had another buyer, so the search went on. The Rochelles had learned that a fair housing committee could help them see homes through a real estate agent that they could not see alone. But they had also learned about a final barrier, the white homeowner who will not sell, who according to New Jersey's laws does not have to sell to a Negro.
What about white homeowners in suburbia? How do they actually feel about this question? It's almost impossible to find any who will discuss it in front of a camera, but just 1 year ago, a group from Columbia University made a study of this very question.
They went to Ridgewood, New Jersey, a suburb of 25,000 people just beyond the cluster of towns in which the Rochelles have been searching for a home. Ridgewood is nearly all white, a community of lovely homes, over 80% of them owned by the families who live in them. More than half of Ridgewood's families have incomes between $10,000 and $25,000 a year. Nearly a third of the adults are college graduates. Ridgewood has a small Negro section near the railroad tracks. The total Negro population, about 300. Negro children go to school with whites. A scientific sample of 204 white heads of families, husbands and wives, was interviewed in the study. Later, Senior Research Associate Kenneth J. Lenahan of Columbia's Bureau of Applied Social Research and 6 of his doctoral candidate students discussed the survey.
Did anyone have any experiences where they thought the person was inconsistent in attitudes?
I did, Ken. I found, for instance, with one woman that I talked to, she was very well educated. She had, her husband was a doctor, and she knew a great many people in the community, was very active. And she said, in response to, were there any people in Ridgewood trying to desegregate, she said, oh yes, that there were, and that the reason they were is that nowhere was there nice housing for good and nice Negro families. And just before that, not a few sentences before, she had said, but of course, although she was not opposed to Negroes in the community, she could not sell her house to one because her neighbors would object.
Yeah, well, all the interviews I had was that even if they felt not opposed to Negroes moving in, they would not sell their house to the Negro.
You find this a surprise?
No, I don't think it was a surprise. I think I sort of expected this attitude.
And what it turns out is that two-thirds of the people in our sample say that they're not opposed to a Negro on the block. However, 80% of the sample would be opposed to selling their own house to a Negro.
Same sort of thing with a young man who was an engineer and is sort of in his early 30s, and he was on a lot of the questions that related to how do you feel about Ridgewood and about your neighbors. He was obviously social and friendly and all that, but he sort of disagreed with him on lots of things. And when I asked this question about would you sell your house to a Negro, he said sure, and went on to elaborate that he'd be sort of happy to see a little disorganization come to the community, and he wouldn't mind at all if the people complained about it. He didn't feel pressure from the neighbors in this sense.
People who said that they were opposed and people who said that they were not opposed gave this response that they wouldn't sell their house to a Negro because they felt that their neighbors would object to it. And one man put it this way, he said that this would be a disservice to the community and to other people around him.
Of course, all this is imagined. They're not really accurate about how the community feels. Because when we ask the questions, we can show that only about 18% said they would think of moving, whereas 80% of the people thought that others would move. So there's a certain kind of community ignorance that runs through it all, a misperception of neighbors, a feeling of great hostility out there toward Negroes that turns out is not true according to the survey.
In Ridgewood today, there is further evidence that this feeling of hostility toward Negroes is not true. In the years since the Columbia University study, 3 white homeowners have sold their homes to Negro families. Ridgewood remains the peaceful community it always was. In the final analysis, the Rochelle's search for a home was really a search for white homeowners like those anonymous 3 in Ridgewood. Corbett Rochelle knows that.
Ideally, I would like to live in a neighborhood where people do not run because a person of another group or belief has moved into the neighborhood. This is the kind of ideal situation that every Negro would like to live in, where people come and go in a normal fashion, where they live in a neighborly atmosphere. I've never been in a neighborhood like this. I understand that there are some, but I've never been in one.
Corbett Rochelle is right. There are such neighborhoods, though they are rare. We found one across the Hudson River from New Jersey in New York, too far from the center of Corbett Rochelle's business to be a possible place for them to live. Before following the Rochelles further in their search, we visited this neighborhood. What we found illustrates both the success and some of the hard, continuing problems of maintaining racial stability in a really integrated residential area. This is the Glenwood Lake section of New Rochelle, New York. Here, in a neighborhood of one-family English Tudor and other style homes, 59 Negro and 2 Oriental families live among 114 white families. The houses, most of them about 30 years old, sell for $20,000 to $35,000, a few even higher. The area takes its name from Glenwood Lake, which forms one of its boundaries. In these 2 homes, side by side, live a white and a Negro family. Here, Dr. and Mrs. Daniel Bloom, white. Here, Mr. and Mrs. Wesley Parker, Negro. Both families have children. Both moved to the neighborhood at about the same time. Sylvia Bloom and Wesley Parker, next-door neighbors, told us how they happened to move here.
First, I was attracted by the house itself. It was a beautiful house. Second, I was attracted by the school. And third, I was attracted by the neighborhood itself. It's a very attractive neighborhood.
I, unlike my husband, had some emotional qualms about it. And they weren't really dispelled until I had lived here, I think, for maybe a week or 2. I frankly did have these concerns, and yet they were, of course, gone within a very short time, which is proved to me that the best way of really learning to accept other people, differences, is, of course, by living in a situation.
I feel that the primary difference between our living in a completely Negro community is in the day-to-day living and education that my children obtain, in seeing that people of another race are not different and are not antagonistic and are not enemies. As far as social activities are concerned, I know of at least 2 poker games that are played within the community.
2 pair? 6 keys instead of 2 pair.
There are the usual number of birthday parties that are held during the year. Aside from that, there is just spontaneous playing.
Of course, there are a lot of parties and cookouts and just neighborhood get-togethers.
Race really is an irrelevant factor. It has occurred to me living here in terms of the children and, of course, the adults. Where they like each other, they play. Where there's an opportunity to play with each other, they do. Where something strikes their fancy, they will get together. And it's as unstructured, really, as that. Property values in this neighborhood have been very successfully maintained over the years. There are, on this block, 14 houses, 3 of which are occupied by Negro families. The interesting thing about it to me is that over these years, numbers of white families have continued to move in.
This white family, Mr. and Mrs. Peter A. Smith and their son Jerry, moved into a house on that very block just last August. Peter Smith, a systems engineer for IBM, moved to the Glenwood Lake neighborhood from an apartment in New York City. His wife Jenna told us why.
When we looked for a house, we wanted to find a place that offered an integrated neighborhood, and not only an integrated school. We never thought we'd find it, though. We came about looking for the integrated school, and in the paper we saw this particular house, and then we found out that the neighborhood was integrated. The school is a lovely school. We fell in love with the house. It's close to my husband's work, and we liked the feeling of stability about this neighborhood.
The first Negro family moved into the Glenwood Lake area 9 years ago. Almost immediately, a neighborhood association was formed to quiet fears and prevent the panic selling that could only result in yet another Negro ghetto.
I'm one of the co-chairmen of the housing committee on the Glenwood Lakes Association, and I think our role has been in the last 4 years to try to attract white families to the neighborhood. Our most effective results have come from friends of residents and relatives of residents who, upon hearing of the neighborhood, decide that it's the type of community they'd like to move into.
This integrated school, the Daniel Webster Elementary School, has actually been a factor in bringing white families into the Glenwood Lake neighborhood. Ironically, today it poses the Glenwood Lake neighborhood's major problem. Drawing children from other neighborhoods as well, its proportion of Negro students has risen slowly to about 38%. Glenwood Lake residents fear that a much higher percentage might make homes in their neighborhood difficult to sell to whites. To remain stable and integrated, Glenwood Lake must continue to attract white families. So far, it has succeeded. But it has succeeded without much help from the primary source of home buyers, real estate brokers. Brokers, for the most part, do not show homes in Glenwood Lake to white buyers. Across the Hudson River in New Jersey, where Corbett and Sally Rochelle were still looking for a new home, their problem was exactly the opposite. Unless they had a fair housing committee member by their side, most brokers did not show the Rochelles homes in white residential areas.
Everybody works, differently. But you have to specialize in a certain price range. I find myself, see, as long as I've been in the business, you have to do this. Jumping from 15 to 28 throws you off. Do you get what I mean?
What you're really saying, are you, in essence, is that you don't have anything in this price range.
The problems that the Rochelles had in seeing homes through real estate agents led us to the president of the New Jersey Association of Real Estate Boards, Mr. Harry A. Wilson, Jr.
Mr. Wilson, say a Negro who is economically qualified comes into a real estate agent's office in New Jersey, and he wants a home in a predominantly white suburban area. What generally happens to that Negro family?
Well, the first thing that happens is that that particular Negro buyer is qualified the same way any other buyer is qualified, so that the broker or the salesman can determine what type home this particular family needs and what type home they can afford. Then they review their listings, and if they have a property that seems to meet these needs, then they can show that particular property or any property that they have that meets that requirement to this Negro family.
When you say that they can show it, are they obliged to show all their listings?
Suppose they had a home that was listed by a person that owned it free and clear and had so announced that he would not sell to a Negro family. This broker, as a representative of his client, would probably not show the property and explain to the Negro purchaser why. This has happened a great deal in North Jersey, and their experience there, I would say that it happens consistently where they have homeowners that are unwilling to sell to someone because they're a minority group, but they have many other instances where the people are perfectly willing to sell.
Mr. Wilson, we've all heard the assertion that when Negroes move into a predominantly white area, property values there decline. Is that a fact?
This is not a fact. If the people in the area do not react toward this by selling their own home, if there's no fear or panic or great apprehension about it, which would cause them to sell their home,
there is no effect upon value.
Mr. Wilson, what action does the National Association of Real Estate Boards and the various local state boards take in opposing fair housing legislation?
Our National Association has been against the extension of forced housing. We in the state of New Jersey have fought the forced housing bill year after year, and we have defeated it. We believe that if the people in the state of New Jersey had a right to vote on this particular issue, that the people in the state of New Jersey would vote against forced housing, just as the people of California voted 2-1 against forced housing. Now, this does not mean that the people that voted 2-1 against forced housing were against civil rights.
Well, if they're not voting against civil rights, what are they voting for?
They're voting for their right to dispose of their property, the freedom to use, to enjoy, and dispose of their property in accordance with their wishes. This does not mean that they are against selling to Negroes. It just means that they want the freedom to dispose of that which belongs to them according to their own wishes.
Mr. Wilson, there are some realtors who say that they would like to show homes to Negroes in predominantly white communities, but they don't want to be the first in their neighborhood to do it. What about that?
I'm sure that many real estate brokers feel this way. This points up the very crux of the problem. On one hand, we have more and more minority group coming into the economic capabilities of living somewhere beside the city. On the other hand, there seems to be resistance in some of our white areas. And certainly some of the real estate brokers have apprehension about introducing the minority group because this is the very area where they operate, where they make their living. And they're concerned about this. As a matter of fact, if there were a law and everyone were forced to comply with this law, this would make our job much easier.
Then you're for fair housing laws?
Not at all. The fact that it would make our job easier does not make it right. We feel that the rights attendant to private property are the very foundation of our nation, and we don't think they should be tampered with.
Well, then you feel that laws dealing with property rights should take precedence over laws dealing with human rights?
They are not in conflict at all. We also believe that people should be able to acquire a property within their means, and we will defend this right. And it's one of enjoying the benefits of our great country to be able to acquire a home, but not to take away from somebody else the right of free disposition of it. Don't start forcing Americans to bend to the law of a group that seems to think that an owner must sell whether he wants to or not. This is not the way we do things in America.
William Jackson of New Jersey's Division on Civil Rights disagrees.
Well, I think decisions that have been made have run counter to this argument. And I think that one has to recognize that there are a number of restrictions on private housing. Some areas and cities and states have rent control, for example. Almost all municipalities have zoning ordinances, health codes. It is not possible for any of us as property owners to make any desired change which we want in our property without seeking some form of approval from the local governing body. And I think that this form of legislation is no different than these other restrictions which obtain against private property. I think the need is great. We have seen in so many ways over the years and even just recently, from riots in New Jersey, which were unfortunate, from so many other problems, that the question of housing is perhaps the prime problem which minority groups have today. And generally, when in this area we are speaking primarily, certainly in the eastern part of the country, of Negroes and Puerto Ricans. And this is a prime need. And I think it's important because, in a sense, it is the basis of other problems which we have, such as de facto segregated schools. If you have a neighborhood school system, and if you have what those of us who work with this problem call a Negro ghetto or a black ghetto, then it's going to follow that this neighborhood school is going to be segregated in fact. And I think for a solution, a long-run solution to other problems that we have, such as in education, in just better living standards, that a more comprehensive law both here and in other areas of the country is the only solution.
2 weeks ago, William Peters of CBS Reports, who had followed the Rochelle's long search for a home, asked them how they felt about it.
Well, when we started looking last July for a house, I had hopes that we would celebrate Christmas in a new home. And of course, it's obvious that we won't now. It's a little discouraging.
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm discouraged. I think disappointed is a little better term, because I had thought, like Sally, that we would have found a place before now. But I know that we will find a place, and I, of course, knew that it wasn't going to be easy. And, well, my whole philosophy of life is that you continue to look for whatever you want until you find it.
Mrs. Rochelle, are you convinced that the house you want is out there and in some quantity?
I don't feel that we're looking for the impossible. I think that it's out there. Whenever I pick up the paper, I can see several ads that appeal to me. Oftentimes, we follow up these ads and find that for some reason, sometimes we cannot even see the house. But I feel like we are looking for something that's there. I mean, we don't ask for the type of house that's not being built or that is not already in existence.
Has this whole experience in any way changed whatever feelings you previously had toward white people?
I don't hate anybody for it, or I don't feel that, oh, gee, all white people are no good. I think the good that the fair housing is doing overshadows this other. Maybe my feelings are a little mixed because I have a child. My child understands what we have gone through, and I think that touches me more than maybe if we had no children and were house hunting and went through all this.
I didn't realize that there were so many white people working for the betterment of race relations. And then on the other hand, where brokers, some of them are concerned, didn't realize to what lengths some of them would go to keep from showing a Negro a house in a neighborhood where there were no Negroes. You go into these places and they talk to you and they listen to what you want in terms of a house. And then he informs you, of course, that he doesn't have it. Well, now, he has all the records. There's no way possible that you can prove that he does have what you want, or that he just doesn't want to show it to you, or that he is discriminating against you. You can't say this.
But you're not discouraged.
Well, I would say that in spite of all the difficulty, in spite of all the obstacles that have been put in our way, and in spite of the fact that we are a long ways from, at this point, from finding what we're looking for, it's all been worth it. And finding this house will be even more so worth the effort. It will, I think, it's like the first Negro into anything. It breaks the ice for the other Negroes who would want to come behind or to follow.
For a long time, in one large section of our country, the South, there were signs reading white and colored over doorways leading to food, shelter, transportation, education. But in recent years, all three branches of our federal government have said that these signs were wrong. Slowly, the last of them is now coming down. Which raises a question that must be asked. Is it more wrong to tell a Negro in the South, by a sign on the door, that he is not welcome, than to make him walk through an unmarked doorway in the North and find out for himself?
Last weekend, Corbett and Sally Rochelle, accompanied by Gene Strickholm, went out once more in search of a house. They didn't find one. Next week, they will try again.
We're going to find the house that we want. We have to find it. We are in the process of getting rid of our house, and we have to have a place to stay. No matter what it takes or how much is involved in terms of time and effort, we're just determined to find the house that we want.
Segregation, Northern Style, was filmed and edited by the staff of CBS Reports under the supervision and control of CBS News.